Thanks, Jovi. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. So as Jovi mentioned, I'm a partner here at Erevena. We are a search firm that do leadership hiring for early stage or like venture-backed businesses and PE-backed businesses, basically. So we do typically C-suite, VP, head of, director level, anyone that's kind of the most senior person in function or kind of second in line for businesses from seed all the way up to kind of IPO and everything in between. At the bigger end of the spectrum, some of our clients that you would know would be Airtable, Zendesk, Box, Solonis, Grafana Labs, all the way down to kind of the seed stage. And as a partner here, I focus on engineering technology for B2B. And I joined here from a fund called Notion Capital, where I was their talent director, and they're a $750 million B2B software venture fund, kind of Series A. So I've seen lots of different bits of leadership challenges and kind of solutions at an early stage. I'll take you through some slides. I'm going to try and make it not death by PowerPoint, so feel free to kind of interrupt me and ask questions if you have any, or make observations. But I'm going to take you through this data project that I ran earlier this year, which looks at 80 B2B software unicorns, who they had in their VP and C-suite from the month of first founding to 5 years after. There's also in this report companies that are referred to as control companies. So those are 40 companies that didn't do so well. So they're never valued at more than 250 million, but they did get the same amount of funding as on average at seed and Series A from tier one funds as the unicorns did. So in the control companies, there's companies that were backed by Andreessen Horowitz, by Sequoia, by Point9. It's just that they weren't so valuable in the end, and so there's a good point of comparison there. I'll skip past the rest of this because it's reasonably wordy, and we'll kind of come on to the rest of it as we go through. The main things to note about the data are that this is not intended to be causal. It's correlation only. It's for discussion rather than, like me telling you if you hire a VP sales when you're 2 years into the business, then you will become a unicorn. That's not the link that we're trying to make. I refer throughout the report to leaders, and what I mean by that is C-suite, GM, VP, so SVP, AVP, RVP, that kind of thing. Timings, as I mentioned, year zero is the date of first product release. Founders and non-founders are all in the data together, and then I've got a summary at the end that I'll go through, but I'll just jump in with looking at number of leaders in the average unicorn versus control company. So at the beginning of the journey, so year zero, like when the first product is launched for the unicorns and the control companies, they have the same number of leaders on average in both groups. And by which I mean the unicorns have 3.5 and the control companies have 2.1, but those numbers are not statistically different from each other. So we kind of assume that they're the same. But 1 year after that, the unicorns have already done a much better job of scaling at the leadership level. So they're up to 5, and the average control company is up to 2.8. So the average unicorn hires like 1.5 people, and the control group companies hires half a person. And then that gap just sort of continues to spread, so that by year 5, the average unicorn has 14 people in leadership positions, and the average control company has only 4.6. This doesn't include churn. This is just like bums on seats at those snapshots in time. And so if we actually consider churn in here, what it means is that the average unicorn hires 16.5 leaders over that time period, not including founders. And the average control company hires 4.6. Any questions on that one at all? Or observations or anything?
Is there any data at all on how many of them are hired externally versus how many grow with the company internally?
Yeah, so it's actually not in the deck, but yes, about 4 out of 5 are hired in from external sources, and 1 out of 5 is promoted internally in the unicorns. Control group was slightly heavier on the promotional, the internal promotion. So I hope that answers your question. Any other questions or observations on this one at all? Super, I'll move on. So then if we just look at the unicorns, and what we can see is just the split by function here. So the average unicorn starts out by being engineering, technology, product, ops, legal, finance heavy, which kind of makes sense. And then somewhere between year 2 and year 3, that switches to being go-to-market heavy, which we assume is around about the time that the unicorns get product market fit and then start staffing up their commercial teams. By year 5, it's roughly 6 people in the go-to-market function, 4-ish in engineering, technology, and product, and 4 in ops, legal, finance, HR. I think the thing to note about this is, depending on where you guys are at in the journey of your businesses, you might be thinking about hiring a head of sales or a VP sales. I do often speak to founders who, once they've done that once, sort of think it's done. And the slightly frightening thing from this graph is, once you've hired 1 VP of sales, you kind of have to hire 5 more over the next 5 years to be in line with unicorns, which can seem like it's quite a scary number. But my reason for mentioning it is because that 6 can break down between, obviously, customer management, marketing, and then different parts of the sales funnel. So it might be kind of pre-sales or sales engineering, solutions sales, like that kind of stuff. It could be regional, so it could be like a sort of GM North America who's very sales facing. So the number, that 6, looks quite a big number, but it's spread across so many different areas of go-to-market that it does sort of make intuitive sense, certainly to me. Any questions or comments on that one at all? No, okay. Years of prior experience in leaders. So there's no difference at all in the average years of prior experience of leaders in unicorns versus control companies. But there is a difference if we look at the split between the least and the most experienced. So in the unicorns, the average unicorn 5 years in had a most experienced leader with 25 years behind them and a least with 5. Whereas in the control group, those numbers are more like 23 and 9. So a gap of kind of 20 years in unicorns and around about 14 in the control group companies. I think it's an interesting one because I think we often think about diversity as being about gender, ethnicity, country of origin, sexual orientation. I think we often don't think just about years of experience, and I think it's a really interesting measure because, certainly in my experience, people that have got 25 years behind them think really differently to people that have got 5 years behind them. And there's lots of pros and cons to each end of the spectrum, but having them both in the room together can be really powerful, I think. And certainly the people at the more junior end of the spectrum typically come to the table with bigger ideas and more thinking about like what the end point is. Like, we could do this and we could do this, we could take over this market, we could build this thing. Generally, the people with the 25 years behind them typically think a little bit more about, those are great ideas, like, how do we get to those? How do we get to achieving those things, and what's the path, and drawing on experience there to make clear what the path is. I don't know if any of you have got any thoughts on that, or anyone in the business at either end of the spectrum that you think is a good representation of those years of experience at all. No, okay.
Just to clarify there, so that's years. It's not years of experience as a leader, it's years of experience in role or in business.
Yeah, exactly. And then functional split of the first 3 leadership hires. So I often get asked, like, what's the function of the first person you should hire after the founders, obviously? And the answer is, there isn't really an answer. It's kind of split equally between all of the different functions. In other words, like, every case is different, and you kind of have to assess for you and your business which is the first function in which you need to hire a leader, based on who else is in the leadership team at the founder level, and what stuff do you need to do, essentially. I don't know if any of you have made your first leadership hire, but if you have, it'd be great to hear about which function they were in and how you landed on that function. No one made a leadership hire.
Well, if head of classes as, then we do now have head of product, head of data, head of engineering, head of sales, business, sales and marketing, still sort of one person at the head of that. Which one did we hire first? Head of who started first? Head of product started first. Actually, they're all quite, apart from head of engineering, the other three were all hired at a reasonably similar time. There wasn't that much difference between them. Product first, then data, then sales, then engineering.
And how did you land on the first hire being that Gita?
Well, just actually our strategy was different before. But what I came to realize is that I've been through that many salespeople trying to, actually it was founder-led sales before that. So I obviously that you can't scale with founder-led sales, and it's not for one to try in. We went through lots of salespeople, but the product's pretty complex. It's pretty steep learning curve, and most didn't actually even get past the point where they could understand the market enough to demo the product. So yeah, it was after actually just lots and lots and lots of failed attempts, which was obviously a big drain on my time, that we decided to hire in a more senior role when we obviously had the money to do that, and get a better caliber of employee. And yeah, and then that worked out. We just did it through a recruitment agency, a specialist recruitment agency in technology.
Yeah, okay, super. Anybody else, any comments on any of that? No. Okay. Percentage of companies that hired at least one leader in the function shown. So I think the most interesting thing for me here is that just over half of the unicorns hired someone into a people in HR leadership role within the first 5 years. But in the control companies, that was only 1 in 10. So quite a big delta there. I think interesting also because in a SaaS business, around 80% of the money that you raise goes on headcount in terms of salaries. And so it is the kind of the biggest single investment that you'll make as founders. And I think it's interesting that unicorns tend to see the value of facilitating that a bit better than companies that didn't do so well. Having someone in leadership there to help make sure that people are engaged, that they understand what they're supposed to be doing, that they're compensated fairly and in a way that's transparent, and all the other things that go into the people in HR function. I'm not sure if any of you have got HR leaders on the team, or whether you're thinking about it, but would be great to hear your thoughts. Super. So just around tenure. So in exec recruitment, we often get asked, like by clients that they want to see people that have been in jobs for 5 or 6 years in a stretch in the past, but that's actually not really a reflection of successful executives. Most of them are in roles for sort of 2 to 3 years in businesses that go on to become unicorns. And that's the same in control companies, but I think the interesting thing to note here is that there's no correlation with staying longer, with holding on to leaders longer in the job and the company's success. Partly reason being that unicorns grow so quickly that when leaders join them 2.5 years later, the business that they joined is now a completely different place, and it's maybe not what they joined for. And also because, frankly, often people are quite tired after this long, or like really running at a unicorn valuation. And so they often like leave to do something slightly different, or leave to take some time out. I don't know what your thoughts are on tenure when you're hiring people, whether you would consider 2.5 years to be too long. Anyone, any thoughts?
I think it's decent, even not in the unicorns situation.
In the what situation? Sorry.
I mean, you mentioned about like unicorns, but I think in 3 years, usually still, even it's not unicorn, I think it still changes a lot within the company. Yeah. So especially, I think sales marketing, CS is the most affected, I think, once, in my opinion and in my experience.
Yeah.
Engineering and operations is a bit longer.
Yeah, I think the other thing to mention about this also is that not only does the business kind of change, but also for most senior level people, if they're in a corporation, they would want to move roles every 2.5 to 3 years. And in an early stage business, you obviously can't do that because there's nowhere to go. So you have to leave. So this is a reflection also of that. Just a little bit around relocation. So there's often an impression that relocating leaders is essential for the growth of the business, but again, there's no data to confirm that at all. The HQs of all the businesses were in the same places as a split, so around about half in San Francisco, about 10% in New York, and then the rest of the world. So if you're thinking about how you would hire a leader, you don't have to move them internationally. They can be from exactly where you are. And then educational background and previous employers. So this is one of my favorite ones, I'd say. Around 86% of unicorns had someone in a leadership position that had an undergraduate degree from a top 50 university, but also half of them had someone in a leadership position that hadn't graduated from university. So they have a real mix of educational background in the leadership team. And similar to the years of experience, I think we can overlook this as a measure of diversity, when actually having had the chance to go to university and then being able to do it versus those that did get the chance and went to a top university can represent quite different pools of background. And certainly cognitive diversity for this one, I think, is really interesting. I don't know if any of you have got people on the team that are from either end of the spectrum, or whether you are yourselves, and whether this kind of resonates with you at all. And that's just the data in a slightly different format. So no degree, there's more people with no degree in leadership in unicorns than went to Stanford and UC Berkeley combined, which I think is interesting, because certainly as an executive search firm, we get asked quite a lot to help find people that went to top universities, and actually there's kind of no correlation with that and outcome. So an interesting one for you to take away there.
Does it mean that 95 do have a degree?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But from different universities, exactly. But the previous slides are all about data. Just a note on some more subjective elements. So I think one of the main things, excuse me, to take away here is just the quantity of leaders. So if you're on the path to becoming a unicorn, excuse me, aiming to hire one leader per quarter is kind of the benchmark. So it's 16.5 over the 5 years. There's some examples of this kind of out there in the real world as well. So there's a group of people called the PayPal Mafia, who were all the sort of early stage leaders when PayPal was a really young business. And I think there's about 25 of them. There's a Wikipedia page about them. And also, as another example, Snowflake had 61 people in their first 5 years in leadership. And that's that was the biggest company in our data set. So they hired way more than one a quarter. But just as a sort of takeaway for you, if you're thinking about how to achieve this at quite the high level, then one per quarter. And there's 2 examples of companies that have done that there. Experience are having some leaders with more than 25 years behind them and others with around 5. The sort of standout examples of this in the real world are Larry Page and Sergey Brin hiring Eric Schmidt at Google, who Eric Schmidt, I think, had 28 years behind him when he joined Google. And obviously Larry Page and Sergey Brin, I think, had about 3 years between them. And then also HashiCorp. So the founders of HashiCorp were reasonably young when they started the business, and they hired a guy called Dave McJanet, who I think was about 30 years into his career, and he joined to be CEO when they're really early stage. And I think their market cap's about 25 billion now. So that kind of went okay for them. And then functions, so hiring a people and HR leader within the first 5 years. Some well-known examples of that. Patty McCord at Netflix, who wrote a book about the culture she created there. That's kind of the most famous one. But also some great examples of software businesses that have done the same thing. So Richard Fye joined Datadog when there were about 120 people, and then left when there were about 2,000. And then Leah Sutton, who's at Elastic, joined when there were about 300 people and left when they were, I don't know how many, but north of a couple of thousand post-IPO. So all good examples there of companies that made those early stage hires. And then tenure, so long tenure doesn't necessarily correlate with success. 2.5 years for non-founders is average. An example of that is a guy called Bill Macatis, who was at Zendesk for 2 years and then Slack for 2 years. And in both those companies had a huge impact and is really well referenced from those companies, but left because the point at which he joined them was completely different in terms of the company style than when he left. And also, I've spoken to him about this, and he said after both of those journeys, he was actually just quite tired and needed a break because he gave it everything he had, and so kind of needed to leave and reset. And then education, and trying to hire leaders with top degrees and also no undergraduate degrees. And Bill Gates is kind of the ultimate example of someone who did that, but also Sam Altman as another example, doesn't have a degree, is co-founder, does. Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. There's a bunch of examples out there of people that have got both ends of the spectrum there. And that's it. Any questions at all, observations from anybody? And feel free to ask me generally about executive hiring and kind of early stage business, if you just got any questions about that.
I
So
was just going to ask, go on, Igor, go on, you.
sorry, which is back to the question I asked about 95% of the leadership team having a degree. Does that seem to be like a requirement for those kind of jobs to have a degree? Because 95% is almost like a mandatory requirement, it looks like.
No, it's not a requirement. No. We certainly wouldn't suggest to any of our clients that they would have to hire someone with a degree. It's much more around what you've done in the last few years that's important.
Right. And then when about the section about the relocation, does that mean relocation for office work, or is the or do you have the data about the kind of a remote versus the in-office work?
So we don't have any stats on that because part of the data was taken during COVID, the rest of it wasn't. So there's no way to gauge, kind of what's real and what's not. But that's from city to city. That data. So and the most common cities that people are relocated from and to are from New York, San Francisco, and from San Francisco to New York.
Right. But if we put this away, if we would look at hiring a leadership role, would your advice be to have someone close and present in the office with people, as this is like an important thing for management, or it completely
depends on it completely depends on the kind of company that you want to build. If you're happy with hybrid, then no, you don't need it. If you're happy with fully remote, then no, you don't need it. If you'd like to be in the office, then yeah, you need it. I think, we usually just say to our clients, like, you need to be consistent about it. If it's a hybrid company and everyone's in the office like a week a month or whatever the amount is, then the leader should do that too. And I think just building on that, if you are open to looking at people outside of the city that you're based in, then you obviously really increase the talent pool quite drastically. And so it's worth considering what that trade-off is. But no, I wouldn't say you need, it's not a one size fits all at all. There's no indication whatsoever that having people in the office correlates with better outcome.
Okay, thanks. And the last one, sorry guys, before so if we're looking for somebody, a remote leader, what specific traits or what different skills or signals they should have that different than what you would normally see in people kind of in person kind of leaders? Is there kind of a, I don't know if I hope you understand my question. Is it any way different the job description, or not job description, but what you'll be looking in those people anyway different if you'll be hiring them to work remote?
No, there's nothing different about it at all. I think the major thing is some people won't like it and you have to rule those people out. if this was a conversation in 2019, it would be a completely different conversation. I'd say the thing that you have to have is that person has built a remote team before and is very comfortable doing it. In 2023, almost 2024, everybody's done it. So there's like, everyone can do it. Everyone has a track record of being able to do it. Some people prefer not to do it. Some people prefer to do it. I think one thing that happened certainly during COVID was that it sort of democratized leadership roles for people that were in locations that weren't fantastic. Like, for example, I know a candidate really well who's based in regional Hungary, who previously is really talented, previously didn't have the opportunity to work for any San Francisco-based businesses, and now is a leader in a San Francisco-based business and doing really, really well there. Like, it's not, you know, and for that person, that's worked out really well. But everybody can do it. It's just a case of whether they want to do it. But there's no different like personality traits or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions at all?
I have a question. Or sorry, actually, I think Kevin, you had a question before.
You go. It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, thank you. So my one is maybe more practical. What are your thoughts about hiring a person from first? So there's basically two bits of questions. So let's say hiring a person, so how high you should be aiming, or there's no difference. So let's say you are at Series A, so how far you should go, B, C, D, or it's just like B only, or there is no difference. So what's your take on this one? And the second question is a bit also when you're hiring a person, non-SaaS experienced leader, how impactful that is for the SaaS business.
The second one's reasonably binary. I don't think you should ever hire a leader into a SaaS business with no SaaS experience.
Unless you shouldn't be doing that.
Specific use case for it, like for example, if you're doing SaaS health tech and you need someone that's got a PhD in the specific field, then fine.
But you think it's important, right?
Sorry?
You think that is important? I mean,
I think it's completely essential unless there's a specific reason not to do it. And we're talking only about leadership, right? Like mid to junior level, like absolutely. There's lots of great people out there with various experiences that can be really additive to your business, but at the leadership level, like everyone needs to understand SaaS metrics. They need to understand what it takes to build a business that can be global and entirely scalable. And in my opinion, you can't do that if you haven't worked in a SaaS business in the past. And we wouldn't run a search for a SaaS leader and put anyone on that list that hadn't worked SaaS before. And then your first question, I didn't really understand. I'm sorry.
So maybe that's my very specific way of searching for people. So how I usually let's say we are at Series A stage, and usually I don't go behind Series B, because I think the people behind Series B, so meaning like Series C, D experience, they will be a bit of out of reach and out of hand to employ their experience and knowledge into Series A. That's the one thing. And secondly, they might be already, their experience, if they have been in Series A stage, they might already forgot it. And third, what my experience was, I had one leadership position, like Chief Product Officer, from nearly IPO company working at us. And for him to be able to execute properly, he needed tons of people just to be basically available to do something. So he was not that much hands-on anymore, and he was more, empowering team, like pretty large team for the stage of ours was a bit crazy. So that was one of the biggest mistakes in the company building. So what's your take on this one?
So my take on it is that I've seen lots of people do very well in early stage companies who've come from much bigger companies. It happens very frequently. The thing that you have to check is like whether they actually want to do earlier stage again and whether they know. So if you're interviewing someone from a big company and you're a small company, you should just check with them, just say to them, like, you're not going to have a huge budget here. You're not going to have a huge team. Like, how would you feel if you showed up and on day one you had to let your whole team go? Like, would that be a job you'd want to do? and then you kind of have to trust that their response to that is honest, basically. And really sense check it by saying, like, this is what the budget is and this is what you have to do, and like how would you achieve that? I think in any hiring process also it's really important to have some sort of case study. It shouldn't be like a technical test at the leadership level. All leaders should know how to do the job, but there should be a case study around kind of is there someone else joining? There should be a kind of a case study around sort of, like, this is our path to the next funding round. This is the budget you'd have for your department. Like, what would you, how would you spend it, kind of thing, or a test that's a technical challenge that's like that, so you can really understand like how they're thinking about it and whether that's a fit for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's very, very good advice. It just makes sense for me. So thanks.
There's definitely a school of thought in this industry that founders should hire only people into leadership that have done the exact journey before that the company's about to go on. And I personally think that's not realistic and not correct. Like, so yes, it's helpful if they've done a similar journey in the past. Yes, it's very helpful if it's the same journey, but equally, there's lots of benefits to be had from someone that's done a bit of a later journey or someone that's done a bit of an earlier journey. Often people don't want to do exactly the same journey again. They often want to do something a little bit bigger or a bit smaller, so you can attract more people by opening that up. If someone's done a 10 million to 20 million journey in their last job and you want them to go on the 20 to 30, and they're really enthusiastic about that and know enough to get it done, versus someone who's done it before and isn't so enthusiastic about it, arguably the person that's more enthusiastic is the better fit. Depending on things, but
and usually what I look at also, I usually try to also not only look at the success of the company. So sometimes, hiring a top exec, for an example, from Slack will not help you a lot, because the Slack has a lot of tailwind for them to be, successful, and then later might be not part of the case why they were successful. And what I usually try to look at is like media core goodish business who grew and did a lot of job themselves to make that happen. And of course it's very hard to get the leadership, but they usually go for one level down. So basically the person next to the leadership, I know that he's blocked to the next role. So then actually you can promote him to, let's say, director to VP, and then you can get nearly the same knowledge from the previous leader and him try to replicate that.
Yeah, no, that all makes sense completely. And sorry, was there a question for me in there, or was that observation, just in case I missed the question?
Sorry?
Was there a question in there for me?
No.
It's just
I just shared. I know. I just shared my thoughts.
Oh, that's super helpful. Thank you. Did that answer both of your questions, or was there anything?
Yeah, very good and helpful actually. So I think you helped me a lot, especially how to address leaders and try to unpack their want or availability to actually work in a less luxurious position of a lot of people.
Some people really want to do it. Some people really want to go back to the stage, particularly people that have made money in a previous job. So there are executives out there who are often later into their career, they've made a lot of money and they just want to do something now that's interesting. And are happy to take a big pay cut like that. We definitely see that a lot. So I think so that's worth bearing in mind too. Kevin, did you have a question? I'll come straight to you this time so that you can ask it.
No, thank you. So I'm just keen to get your thoughts and opinions on hiring from network and talent that you've worked with previously. We've got maybe a situation where we've got a talented and diverse leadership team that we've worked with previously in a previous business that were acquired, that I think there's a lot of appetite to kind of get the band back together, so to speak. But there's also whilst there's great talent, as I say, diversity and like maybe comfort of knowing exactly the type of people and the ability to work together and so on, there's also maybe a slight downside that we've been through the same experiences and like lived a lot of the same lessons. What's your kind of view of the pros and cons there, and what you might say to a company in that position?
Well, I mean, I would say that like hiring through network is not scalable at all. So if you want to scale, it can't be your strategy. Hiring some people through your network that you know to be really good, that are available, that you would like to work with, again, is great. Like, you should absolutely do it, save on recruiter fees, and, you know, enjoy the journey of going on. Enjoy the journey of growing a business with someone that you would like to grow a business with, but it's not a scalable strategy. And you do risk the fact that if you didn't have a huge exit in your previous business that you were really, really happy with, like, why would you get that if you did it with the same group of people? And not to say that there's any specific person in there that's not good to go on the journey with. It's more just like, maybe you need something a little bit different added into the mix. And maybe you can get that with external hires, but I think doing it for the reasons that you really like the people, you think it'd be fun to work with them, you think they're really talented, but you know you're going to have to hire externally at some point in the near future, is great. I think doing it with a view that like you then won't have to hire externally is very risky for scale.
Yeah, makes absolute sense. Very fair. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
But I hope at least you hire some people that you've liked working with in the past, and it's for the reason that it would be fun. Because I think that gets overlooked a lot in exec search, that you're going to be in this business for a long time, and if you don't actually really enjoy working with the people on your team, then you could probably make more money in a corporate and also not enjoy working with the team. So pros and cons to both there. Any other questions at all?
I can go with one if no one has a question. Are we okay for time, Joey?
We are so okay for time.
All right, cool. Right, what I've done in the past is something that I had a great success hiring is reach out myself to candidates and try to recruit them myself. They seem to be more inclined to respond to me than to our recruiter or HR or whatever. So if I would go to do the same for a leadership role, what is the what is the search criteria or a signal in the company that it's most likely to indicate that people are more likely to consider? So what would be the how would I discover them, and then what would be the best way for me as a CEO of the company recruiting to pitch them?
So how you discover them is really time consuming. I mean, that's a big chunk of the work we do, right? So like the intense work part when we're doing a search is like finding the right people to approach. And that's really hard because you have to have really good knowledge of the industry. The way that we do it is like, we obviously have got a lot of internal knowledge that's confidential, but is shared with us frequently around what company revenues are, stuff that's not in the public domain. So if you came to us and said, we want to hire a VP sales that's done a 10 to 20 million revenue journey, like, you can't find out who those companies are, where that person would be, but we know because we've asked people that often. So it's not to say you couldn't do the search yourself, you absolutely could, but it is just time consuming. There isn't a silver bullet. You have to think really carefully about what you'll need this person to do and where those sorts of people are likely to show up. So let's say you do need it's a VP sales and you need them to have done 10 to 20 million facing into enterprise in contracts with an ACV of more than £1 million, for sake of argument. You need to spend a fair amount of time on Crunchbase figuring out like who are those companies and what other things align, like basic stuff like location and domain and like working culture and all that stuff, and then find the people on LinkedIn and approach them directly from there. In terms of approaching them, it completely depends on the function. Like, so for technologists, often the things that are interesting to them is like, what's the specific technical challenge? what's the challenge around team, and like who's on the founding team. Because if there's a CTO in seat who's a founder, unless that person is leaving, it's often not that appealing to VP engineering, for example. If it's, for example, a sales role, it's often about the ACV and about the amount of funding that the business has got and from who. Actually, for technologists as well, it's about like where the funding has come from and how that will impact the runway of the business. But yeah, it completely depends on the function. And I'm sorry that I couldn't give you a silver bullet for either of those questions. There isn't one. That's why.
That's all right.
I'm very busy.
Yeah, that's all right. That's right. I'll ask you another question just to compensate for that. Let's say we're a bootstrap company, no venture funding. What package or compensation model would work if I'm not very keen to give equity, or that's not that's always the question.
You have to give equity.
Mm.
Yeah, you just have to. There isn't. That's not. Unfortunately, that's not.
What is the typical package, or what's the size of the equity portion? What kind of what's the standard structure more often?
It completely depends on what's the function, what's the person currently on, what can you offer them, where are they? It's how long is a piece of string. I've placed CTOs into businesses on 100K basic salary and 5% of the company. I've placed CTOs into companies on 400K basic salary and 0.5% of the company. It completely depends. I would say, knowing that you're bootstrapped, like one good thing about the market right now is that often candidates want to see that companies are self-sustainable outside of the VC ecosystem. And so leading with like, we are bootstrapped and profitable if you are, or we are bootstrapped and headed towards profitability at this day is a very compelling message for most candidates at the moment. So that definitely works in your favor in this current market.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Any other questions at all?
Cool. I'm just gonna ask you, like, PK obviously joined in late. Do you have any questions before we close up?
I did have one. I was just curious on kind of like going to just along Igor's question. I was curious on what sort of like creative incentives or equity packages do you see offered? Like I've heard like post compensation, phantom stock. Is that common or?
No, it's not common. Cash basic salary, percentage bonus that's based around some form of target, and equity vesting over a 4-year period with a 1-year cliff is like pretty much always what we see. We don't really see anything else, and we kind of wouldn't advise anything else unless there's a specific reason to do it. But that's the standard. And I would say, not offering equity, you'll hire someone without offering equity for sure. Like you'll find someone to do that job, but you won't have the right incentives at the leadership team. You just won't be aligned.
Does it have to be conditional and put in the agreement to performance? Because if you end up giving someone equity, you need to make sure that they're gonna achieve some sort of specific goals.
I have seen goal-based equity, but vesting schedules, but honestly, like the time-based is just much more common, and goal-based can be a bit of a red flag because like it kind of immediately off the bat says, I don't trust that you'll do the job. And for people that have got other options where they could, the best people have got lots of options. So why would they work for you if you immediately off the bat kind of say like, I don't really trust you, when someone else is going to say like, I trust you enough to give you a time-based vesting schedule. And also like, don't forget that it's a 1-year cliff, right? So, and you should know within a year whether the person's going to add value or not. Before that point, if they leave with nothing. So that's kind of on you to make sure that you are checking in during that year, whether you think there's someone that's going to add value to your business in the longer term. And if you think they're not, then you need to let them go.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Essentially.
So if I understood that correct, you say it's common to see a 4-year schedule with a 1-year cliff.
Yeah, so you get no vesting at all in the first year. And then it's usually monthly in equal segments until year 4. But I have seen like quarterly, half yearly. I've seen vesting, as I mentioned, related to targets, but it's usually monthly.
Okay, so that first year is like a trial period. It's like
on equity vesting, yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, but also notice period, right? I don't know about internationally, but certainly in the UK, like you can let people go within the first 2 years with no reason. After 2 years, you have to prove that you've given them fair warning and you've given them a chance to improve. But up to 2 years, you can let people go just for their notice period. And the equity is, yeah, a year. Super. Any other questions at all?
Jamie, Geeta, I know you've both been quiet. You have 9 minutes to get your questions into Maddy.
No questions from me, but that's very interesting. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, actually, the other guys already asked the questions I was going to ask, so.
Perfect. That's over here. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And my little ending here in closing, obviously, Morocco SFM retreat is coming up. We have 7 more tickets on the price that we are at the moment. So be there, be square. Morocco is lovely. The other thing is, obviously, I've sent through that feedback link. I am planning the events for next year. I don't know what kind of workshops you guys need unless you tell me. So let a girl know, fill in the feedback form just so we can plan. Make it even easier if you can pinpoint specific people that you want to see in these workshops. I will try to make miracles. And lastly, I am taking a break from an event next week, so you won't see me till the first week of December. But at that time, we will have the lovely Bo Pakutzlev. Pardon me, Bo, I don't know how your last name, but he is a former SFMer who recently exited. And he wants to talk about it because it wasn't as smooth an exit as he had hoped. So definitely a lot of like what to watch out for, what to look out for. So do sign up and be there. But aside from that, thank you so much, Maddy. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I hope everyone enjoyed that discussion and getting all your questions. And I'm sure if anything else comes up, Maddy will be more than happy to help you guys out. But have a good evening. Have a good Wednesday. Have a good rest of the week. I am now off. So hopefully you guys have a great week ahead as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joey. Thank you.
Thanks, Maddy.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks, Maddy.
Bye-bye.
see ya.